Good morning. Good, it's on. Before I introduce today's speaker, I want to give you a couple class notes. First of all, I hope that people on Zoom and here have found our class schedule on the website. If you haven't, if you go on the home page and click either under Bible Studies or Discipleship, you'll see a list of the classes. Ours is the top one. And then it says you can read the schedule of classes here, with here being the magic word where the link is, and then you'll see the brochure so that you know what's coming. Secondly, I want to plug next week's class because we'll have Henry and Lindsay Cherry here. They will be talking about their work and vision for racial equity and justice in our community. They are the founders of the I Am Academy, and third partnered with them this summer for the Juneteenth activities and for the STEM camp. And as someone who volunteered at STEM camp this summer and has had the chance to hear Lindsay and Henry speak, I can say that they are really an inspiring couple, and I hope you can be here for that. Now to today. It's my real privilege to introduce to you, or reintroduce to you, Jim Padilla DeBorst. In Latin America and with Latinos, Jim is called Santiago, which is the equivalent of James. And this translation tip was a real kind of revelation to me. I did not realize that. You probably know that he is currently serving third as a mission consultant to help us, among other goals, to address opportunities and challenges in cross-cultural ministry. Last week, if you were with us on Zoom or here, you heard about the reciprocal language learning class. Jim and his wife Ruth, who is teaching at Western Seminary, are living here in West Michigan for this fall semester, and then they'll return to Costa Rica, which is their home base. In Costa Rica, they live in an intentional community called Casa Adobe, and in the winter and spring months of this year, Jim will be available remotely to Third to consult and for meetings. Jim's resume is extensive. He has spent nearly 20 years as a development practitioner, both in Africa and Latin America, living in El Salvador for 14 years. He has master's degrees in both nonprofit management and public administration. And Jim and Ruth's ministry out of Costa Rica is local, regional, and global. Through Casa Adobe, the Center for Interdisciplinary Theological Studies, the Cohort of Missioners, and the International Fellowship for Mission as Transformation. Phew. Finally, not least on his resume, is that he is the father of 6 grown children who are living and serving around the world, and he and Ruth recently added a new granddaughter to their family. So welcome, Jim, and thank you for being here again this week with us.
My mic on? Yeah, okay. And I'm just checking, is this all right to be here for Zoom? Good, because I'd like to be close to y'all. So when this talk was set up, one of the titles put on it was Meet Jim Padilla DeBorst. So I'm not sure that's the best topic, but I did choose to go with that a little bit. And so I want to speak to you a bit about who I am, maybe who we are, and what might God be calling us to do now, today. So I was born James Henry DeBorst, Jr. I was named after my dad, and I was born in West Michigan, and I was born into the Christian Reformed Church. So I'm as local as it gets to West Michigan. Holland was a foreign country to me back then. And I went to Christian schools and Calvin College and the whole bit. And that was my name, DeBorst. You know, the kids teased me on the playground because it sounded like divorced. But I got over that. So I was born and raised here and look a lot like all of you. Some of you have gray hair. I don't have any hair. But life after West Michigan forged a very different Santiago. And now I've added Padilla to my last name, which I took from Ruth. Ryan talked about a very difficult passage, you know, these babies getting dashed against the rocks, and said that probably wasn't in our background. When I was 23, I was sent as a missionary to Liberia, and the church in my neighborhood, at the start of the Civil War, became a refuge and was filled with around 300 people. And the army came and shot through the stained glass windows and killed all the people inside, 300 people. And then they locked the doors and nailed up the windows and said, nothing ever happened here. It was the tropics, so it was hot. So you can imagine after a week, the scene. That was just around the corner from where I lived. I ended up in Guatemala, working near another massacre site. And in El Salvador, I was part of a little pastoral team that took the bones out of another church of 117 people and buried them. So the imagery of Psalm 137 was very foreign to James DeBourst Jr., but it became a very real and deep scar within me. Jim Padilla DeBorst, or Santiago Padilla DeBorst. It changed me, it forged me, and the idea of the rage and lament of getting back at someone who could kill a church full of children was real. Psalm 10 was my go-to for my rage and my lament. I'm a very different guy than I was, you know? But I'm here, and we're us. We're third. I'm your consultant. I'm your mission and discipleship consultant today. We all look alike in a way. We're reformed. We are God's children. We might even call ourselves the elect. But I'm sure, even if you've not been in a church where the babies were killed and burnt and machine gunned and grenaded, you've been through a few things in life. My sister says that our dad told her to smile and be a good girl and everything would work out all right. Even in Holland or Grand Rapids, that's not always the case. I'm sure you've lost sleep over children, divorce, death, kids wandering away from the faith, abuse, violence. And so while those experiences of mine might seem to separate us, we are the same. This is a tough world. We can't just smile and be good people and good Hollanders or whatever we are and stick it out and make it all right. And now us, these wounded people, these scarred people, these different people, find ourselves in a different world. A world that our ancestors decided to call Holland, even though Holland is far away, as the kids could have said today. But the world isn't really that far away, because Holland is filled with Latinos, with all sorts of immigrants, with folks that aren't Hollanders, and it's filled with businesses that operate on a global scale. It's part of a world economic system where money and capital and knowledge goes back and forth. A place where the American dream that brought some of us here, or our parents or grandparents, is now known throughout the world. And we came here, or our ancestors did, when the borders weren't too tight. You could come to Ellis Island. Some CRCers, I hear, once U.S. immigration closed down, went to Canada, paid a dime, and took the ferry from Windsor to Detroit, where my mom used to live. And they were illegal immigrants, but they went to visit someone in Holland or Iowa, and they got their papers fixed up. So we find ourselves here in this crossroad of immigration, of business. There are businesses here that make auto parts or soap or Blockbuster Video or whatever it might have been that have world impact. And we try and say, well, we have a border and you got to respect that, which is true. But we're also in a place where the problem isn't so much the border and this line. It's a place where, and Joe Biden didn't do this, or Trump did not do this, or didn't do this. We made a big, beautiful, bountiful, boundless place, attractive to the world, and our culture beams it out around the whole planet. Thanks. Oh, good. And if it was a really, really sunny day and we didn't have air conditioning and the sun was shining all on you and you got really, really hot and this side of the church was a little shadier, some of you would move. We've built a world where the gravitational pull of the bounty and power and might and beauty and safety of Holland, Michigan and the United States is going to pull people no matter what. And we're sitting in a pretty cozy place. And the other side of the church might be full of some of the images I mentioned earlier, disturbing images. Or the people worshiping in that side of the church might be dreaming of dashing somebody else's babies because their babies were dashed. So in this new world, where we have this huge gravitational pull, and there is a big, bad, ugly world out there, a little piece of wood isn't going to stop people from moving. A border isn't going to stop people from moving. My grandfather was in line to inherit his father-in-law's business, But his father-in-law lived too long and he got sick of waiting and decided to come here. He was an economic refugee because his father-in-law lived too long and he would have never got the business. There are folks, and some of them are sitting in El Encuentro right now, whose governments are willing to dash babies and mothers, and whose traditional work, like farming, doesn't happen anymore because of climate change, or because our cousins in Iowa, now with a free trade agreement, are selling their corn in Mexico and Nicaragua and the like, and these folks can't make a living. Many of your, well, my dad and all my uncles were involved in World War II. They fought fascism, they fought Hitler, and the like. During World War II, there was also genocide where millions of Jews were killed. And many of us celebrate uncles or Corrie ten Boom who resisted the Nazis in the Netherlands. And when we finally realized how horrible that world was, we made a set of laws about asylum, because the Jews that tried to flee Germany often got stopped along the way. Or when they got to the border, they said, well, you don't have a visa. So we created a set of laws around asylum out of our faith, out of our humanity, out of our sense of proper duty, out of the horror of gas chambers or babies dying. And El Encuentro right now is full of asylum seekers from Venezuela and Nicaragua. And on TV, they might be accused of being illegal immigrants, but they're not. They're not even undocumented immigrants, because they came and they said, I have a legitimate fear in my country and I want asylum. Eventually, they might not get it. But they have a document from the government that says, I am here waiting for my court date, my day in court, my proper and legal right, according to laws that were passed by the U.S. government, signed by the Senate, signed by the President, and in accordance also with international law. So these folks are here with every right of a Jewish folk fleeing from the Nazis, under the same law. They can't get a work permit, but they can get a job in Holland in 3 or 4 days. You can ask the businesses that employ them how that all works. There might be some laws bent on either side. But I don't want to get down in the weeds of politics and immigration. I want to speak to us as Santiago Padilla, ex-Jim Jr., or Jimmy as my aunts used to call me. I want to talk to us as Christians in a place, in a now, that isn't just Holland anymore. It's the world. The world is coming, and we aren't going to stop it. Trump's wall wouldn't have stopped it. Joe Biden being meaner or tougher isn't going to stop it. If your daughter is about to get raped and you decide it is safer to walk 8,000 miles, you're going to walk 8,000 miles. Now we're here, now. in a world we and our ancestors created, an interconnected world of communications, of telecommunications, of investment, of corporations that go down, don't need visas to get into Central America, nor do their profits need exit visas to come back here. And we are called to live out the gospel. Now, today, here, in this mix. We need to be a new people, changed by Christ, changed by the wounds that we've run through in our lives. We need to realize that the world doesn't revolve around me, like we all thought when we grew up, or my family, when we started to meet neighbors and realized they did things a little different, or our church, who we think has got doctrine pretty figured out pretty well, and yeah, maybe we do. But we are centered not on all that, we're centered on Christ. And Christ says, these are all my people. And we need to include them and love them. And our job isn't necessarily to be Jimmy Jr., who was taught in 4th grade already, why the Baptists were wrong and the Catholics were wrong, and not to go on this side of town. We need to be not who I am, but who you are. Folks who have learned in life that life isn't just about smiling and being good. It's about following Jesus into a radically demanding family of faith. Some people talk about God's kingdom. I like to talk about God's kinship or kingdom. It's a community, it's a faith, it's a place of friends, of neighbors. And we have a whole new set of neighbors who are wounded and beaten up and changed as we have been in our history, but who love Jesus, and we need to love Jesus together. So that's a little bit about me, who I think we are, and what we could do now. And I don't want to keep talking just monologue. I would love to have some questions to react to.
I thank you for all the things you've mentioned, and I struggle myself with what responsibility we have and how to implement that kind of responsibility. I know America is heaven to most people in other countries of the world, and so we all want to go to heaven, Now, we here today are the fortunate ones. God has blessed us by being born here. But my question is, how can we evaluate implementation of our community as sons and daughters of Jesus, of God? It's really hard for me to know what kind of U.S. international relations we need to follow. I can't believe that we very often make good decisions about that, but I would not want to be president either, to have to decide, to have to be responsible, to say yes, no. So do you have a suggestion of what attitude we can put forth to solve that challenge?
Yeah. I grew up in a political family. My father was a professor of political science at Calvin and at Hope. I've studied a lot of politics and economics. I went to Harvard and School of Government. Along my journey, I think the first place to start is with me and us and the church. At the start of the Protestant Revolution, Reformation, was pretty much a revolution, Geneva started to fill up with more and more and more people. And John Calvin, who practically ran the place, not such a strict division of church and state, got up and gave a fiery sermon and said, I want you all to go home and build a second floor on your house. That was John Calvin's answer. Geneva maybe didn't have a big foreign policy, but they let people in, and he told his parishioners to build second floors, started churches and schools, and took care of people. And I think that's our first step. I think that's even our first step at Third. That somehow we need to open doors and get into relationship and see the humanity of all these folks that are coming across the border. Because we need to, we can understand my grandpa, who could have inherited his father-in-law's store if he just sat around in Holland another 10 or 20 years or tripped his dad or put something in his soup and got him to pass a little earlier. We can relate to our own selves coming to this land that we thought was sort of empty and taking it and making it ours. But the humanity and the stories need to touch us first. And out of that love, out of that call, love God, love your neighbor, pretty simple recipe, then we can build up towards better and better policies, you know? My point about the gravitational pull of wealth, of safety, of good institutions, of decent schools, streets without potholes, is no matter how tough we try to make this divisory line, people are going to come over it. If they're getting raped, they're getting killed, their babies are getting dashed against rocks. And if 100,000 come or 10,000 come, the culture of this place is going to be threatened, it's going to be changed, it's going to be stirred up. And we in the church need to get a lot better at being welcoming and including and accepting, because there's a whole nother set of people, and we see them sometimes on the news, that are going to be angry and condemning and use speech against these folks that is undeserving, and be hostile and characterize people who are seeking asylum from what we used to call communist dictatorships in the Cold War are now flown and bussed around like cattle for political stunts, rather than like we used to do with Cubans, was you set one foot on U.S. soil and you're golden. You're got your residence card. You can work the next day. And these laws, like you said, we need to think about them. We need to be wise about them. But the laws change, right? A decade or two ago in Mexico, you couldn't buy U.S. products without paying a tariff. Your Blockbuster Video couldn't rent videos there because everyone copied them and pirated them. But we went down, the U.S. government went down there and said, change your laws so the DVDs and the VHRs don't get copied. Because we want to make some money down here. And they did. And maybe that was a good change. But it was a change, and it was a change so somebody could make some money. Now we have a whole set of people fleeing climate change, fleeing dictatorships, fleeing gangs, and seeking a better world, a better chance to make money. We can respect the laws we have, where they could seek asylum. We could maybe make it a little easier, like we live in Costa Rica. We have Venezuelan refugees in our own home. When they filed their papers for asylum, the government gave them a work permit 30 days later or something like that. And they can work, and they can be out, and they can be driving Uber, you know, and they can make money, and they can be in the sunlight of legality. We have a legal system where they'll sit around for 3 or 4 years waiting for a court date, and they can't work. But the windshield factory or the busy family that needs a cleaner or your favorite restaurant or bar is going to hire them. And how we change our laws, how we make that tough political decision that we ask our presidents to do. It can be for people, or it can maybe be for profit. It can be for rile some people up to get angry and get more votes, or it could maybe be an act of leadership that might upset some people, and we might need church people to support it. Because there are folks over there in El Encuentro that on their way here were robbed, they were felt up by police officers, they had to pay bribes, and in their home countries, they're hunted. And so that's the story and the humanity and the reality we need to react to. And many of our businesses in Holland here are almost 100% employing Hispanics that might not have every dot dotted and every T crossed in their document status. So what do? Treat the stranger amongst you as your brother is one scripture. Neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female is another. Those are the kinds of calls I'd like to see us respond to, but yeah, it's a tough question. Any others? Soon?
If your vision and your work here is successful, as many of us hope, we will be challenged in many ways, but 2 ways that occur to me. We were challenged to share, and that's hard, and we're challenged to change. How will we be challenged to change if your vision is successful here? I mean, Third Reformed Church, in simple ways like, how will the sanctuary look different? How will we live differently?
Yeah, it's a beautiful sanctuary. I don't know how this sanctuary will be changed. You might have heard of a guy named Copernicus. Got in trouble with the church. He said that the sun revolved around the earth, not the earth revolved around the sun. No, the other way around, sorry. I'm better at math and science. But you get the story, right? It was a whole revolution of thinking. When we try to think from ourselves, we always almost end up at the center. We had this big Copernicus revolution, and we finally figured out which planets and stars rotated and where. But pretty quick, we put ourselves and our reason and our power and our confidence in the middle again, and we made the world around our desires and our reason and our rationality. If we want to change Third, if we want to change Holland, if we want to accept that it already changed and the world is here and we're there. The guide for that, to me, is another Copernican revolution where we don't put Jimmy at the center or the RCA or Holland, but we put Jesus Christ. And we put a vision of a new family, not of believing the right things. I went to catechism class to join the Christian Reformed Church, and Alvin Plantinga was my catechism teacher. And he's like this big Christian philosopher. Some people would think that was wonderful, and it was. But it was a lot about a doctrine and getting things right up here. What's going to need to change, and this is probably the hardest, is our hearts. So we love orthodoxy, and I love to think well about problems. But we got to start to think about orthofamilia too. Orthodox belonging. And when we relativize the dividers and raise up Christ and love, that's the only thing that's going to really move us towards ortho family. Otherwise, we're going to believe in the power of our reason, just like after Copernicus, and start making the world around us again. And about the Europeans and about our money and about our borders or this or that. But if we can put Christ at the center, if we can whittle away at the dividers between us and realize we're all wounded people in need of Christ and love, and some of these folks have incredible journeys of faith that can teach us stuff. That's the change that's going to happen. And change is scary, but it doesn't need to be that fast. And the most important thing, I think, is taking one step. Just one step. Abraham, God said, get up and head to a different land. Some of our Latin American friends had envisioned going 10,000 miles. We can stay here. We can still watch Netflix or the Michigan game or whatever. But we can take one step, have somebody over for coffee, go out, and we can start to build this Orthodox family. This family without so many borders. Because in the vision of Revelation, everyone's going to be on bended knee. All the kings and all the queens, the prime ministers and the dictators are going to submit. And they're going to submit to Jesus Christ, the God of love. I don't know what it's going to look like. Hopefully, we'll have a lot of coffee and eat a lot of meals and become friends and family.
My question, hopefully is a follow, excuse me, a follow-up to what you've been talking about. From what you've said to me so far, it's a lot of theory in my brain. That's the way it comes. I accept it, but I need something more practical. I went to last summer to the first bilingual meeting. I had a wonderful time with Yassar, the young man who was liturgist today. But I did not go back again for a number of reasons, mostly because I know no Spanish and I felt like a fool. And his English was quite good. And I'm old and I'm not going to be learning Spanish. So my biggest disappointment has been, I was on consistory when we voted to have Angel and Janelle come. And my understanding, or probably I was being naive, I thought that the folks who were coming would be a part of the congregation and melded in. As it is now, we've got 2 congregations. I don't like that. So what practical things can be done to move us ahead? I guess that's my question.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty new here, and I'm figuring out the turf and trying to think of the best ways. There's a, and I'm with you where you seem to want to go, a unified congregation, a unified people. I think that's what I've been speaking to all morning. How we get there is tricky, and that's been part of my journey. When I went to Central America, I was going to help them. I realized in the end that I was going to help them. And often they ended up helping me. And in the end, we became a new us. So the new us is the end goal. But it's one thing to say, this or that is the table, and we got 2 extra seats, and you can sit there. But we're going to say we eat at 6 o'clock or 5:30, like, I don't know, good Midwesterners or something, or 5. And we're going to have this for dinner. And maybe you can bring something. And we're going to pray this way. And we're going to, I don't know, read the Bible at the beginning. And we're going to close this way. And, we had you over for dinner. We expect you out the door at 8 or something so that we can watch the news or whatever. I'm trying to think of my own family home and make an illustration. It's quite another to go to this trailer park or little apartment where the 8 Colombians are living together with no Spanish and try and figure out what the meal is going to look like and what hour it's going to start, at what time it's supposed to end, when I'm supposed to go home. My wife's Argentine. We tried to go out for dinner once in Argentina with the kids. We were looking for a restaurant at 8:30. We couldn't find a restaurant that was open at 8:30 p.m. They hadn't opened yet. Argentines eat dinner at 11 p.m., 12 p.m. I don't know how they get up the next morning, but that's what they do. Somehow we're going to have to create tables that are both of ours, right? Tables maybe across the border. Tables where, maybe in this sanctuary. But then maybe the music will be different. Or maybe Angel will say part of the communion in Spanish or something. I don't know, we'll be, if some of my ideas contribute to that, we'll do a lot of different experiments along the way. A lot of one steps, you know? And I don't know if you ever learned to dance, but usually take a lot of missteps. And somehow we're going to get there. And we're going to try and eventually create tables that are ours. And I mean the new us, the new creation, the new people, the not Jew or Greek vision of the New Testament and the epistles. And not that Venezuelans will need to know which pew is sort of like, I don't know what third is like, but my family always sat right there on the right side, and my dad on the outside, and all these little things that are unsaid, and we know. And if you're a missionary, you got to figure out about them. They shake hands a different way and everything. All that we're going to figure out together. And it's going to be beautiful and hard, and it's going to be a process of discipleship. And some of us are older than others, and we don't have as many steps to take left in life. Maybe you'll live to be 99 like my grandmother and be a saint until the end. But some of the movement and change will be bigger and broader for different sets of people, I suspect. But the thing is to keep on the journey, you know? We're a pilgrim people. Christianity has got a history of migration and movement, exile and return. And I suspect God has a special way of working in all that movement. When we get too stuck, we start to think we're the center. When we're out walking in the wilderness, depending on the manna, we know God's the center. So I would love to give you a practical one-by-one step. I'm a bit of an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs make a lot of moves and a lot of mistakes, and you get 9 things wrong to get one thing right. So hopefully, we will abound in grace as we make a lot of mistakes. But we also learn and love. And Ruth and I live in an intentional community. We often call it an accidental community because lots of accidents there. People show up accidentally. And we don't have a plan for the details. We have a vision for God's love and love of our neighbors and care of our creation. And that will have to be our compass.
That was a good answer.
I have a little easier one for you. I'm wondering how you ended up in Costa Rica, and tell us more about that intentional community. And I read off a list of all of the kind of roles that you play, but I don't really know what that looks like. You know, how does your life in Costa Rica work?
Yeah, so Ruth is here. Ruth and I are the multi-ethnic version of the Brady Bunch. We each had 3 kids and got married. We had lived through some tough times and violence and change in our life. And then we were both attached to the Christian Reformed Church, and they wanted to do a new project on theological formation for Latin America. And my history in all these Civil War hotspots and tough places those weren't the kind of places to build a Western seminary or a home college. So we picked Costa Rica, which is this nice, stable democracy that everybody takes vacations in, and let's go see the birds and the beaches. Please do come in March. Might be a good month for you. I hear the winter gets a little old in March. But while we were there, we also had all these kids, built a big home, and then it started filling up with all sorts of different people. First it was our kids' friends, daughters of alcoholics, people whose family rejected them maybe because their orientation at that age was not the standard one their parents expected. We thought we'd get like single moms or something. We ended up getting a single dad. And then we started getting some refugees. And so a lot of our ministry has been this sort of open door hospitality thing. And we've taken a lot of these small steps of trial and error in our home. But I mentioned the seminary. So we have a life where we have to do a lot of dishes because we live sometimes with 18 people and, buy a lot of groceries and do a lot of cleaning. And we have morning prayer. It's sort of like a monastery or a commune or a cross between the two, our house. And there are different families that live there sort of out of their Christian vocation to share in spiritual practices like morning prayer every morning and worship services and service to our neighborhood. But then our more official work has been these seminary teaching on a Latin American scale. We started a volunteer program of young people and we have North American young people come down for a year to explore their work, but we put them together with sharp Latin American people of the same age. And so our little 12 disciples for the year, usually it's 8 or 10, are a mixed group, and they learn from each other and bring their strengths and seek to go deeper in discipleship. And then we also participate in what was mentioned in the introduction, the International Fellowship for Mission as Transformation, which is this sort of global body of some of this thought about a holistic mission of Christ's love in all spheres, but like a practical and contextual thinking about how are we going to react to our world. Be it a Holland that's no longer for Hollanders only, or a Uganda that's experiencing drought, or a Manila that's dealing with a dictator. So we work at this crazy level, like the micro or the mini, the meso, all the way up. But it keeps us honest, when we're spouting off on political theology or something. As soon as you're done writing your paragraph, you got to go do the dishes for 18 people or cook for 5 new refugees that showed up or something. It's a odd little life, but it works for us.
We have just a couple more minutes if there's any other questions.
Not knowing that Costa Rica has no army? Do people just get along so well with their neighbor countries that they...
Yeah, so the question is about the fact that Costa Rica has no army. Well, we have this thing called the UN that's supposed to protect your borders if you get invaded. And I guess you all know of the American dream, right? You know, Chevy, apple pie, big Ford 150, nice big house and white picket fence and a bunch of kids, and now maybe a big screen TV or whatever, and the latest iPhone or some nice Levi's or whatever, an iPad. That attracts a lot of people. There's a song in Costa Rica that is sort of the unofficial national anthem, and it has this line about mi ranchito. It's basically my little shack. And behind my little shack, I have a little garden. And I can drink my little coffee, and I can watch the sunset. It's a little sexist. It also talks about my little morenita, which is my little brown wife, you know. But if you step back, it's a pretty nice little vision. It's very different than the American dream, which is sometimes more and more and more. This is, and a lot of our, at least my mother, this was more of her dream, you know, something small, something manageable, something in tune with the poverty of her ancestors. So Costa Rica's national dream is that everybody have a little ranchito and a wife, a good cup of coffee, and a home garden. To get there, they decided to get rid of the army, and they spend a lot of money on education, on health, and they give everybody who wants to buy a house basically no interest loan to get started. It's a country that's not that rich. In the midst of, I think you're alluding to, this messy place where all these other countries are at war and tearing themselves apart. Costa Ricans aren't too worried about getting invaded because people invade Iraq or Ukraine or places where there's oil or something. They don't invade a country to get somebody's ranchito, their little herb garden, their coffee plant, or their public health care system. And so Costa Ricans feel pretty safe, and I feel that's a pretty nice vision for a nation, to want that and have to give up your army and pray to the UN that somebody decides not to invade you.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. We really appreciate it, and thank you for being here. We'll see you next week.
You bet. Thanks to the folks on Zoom for putting up with us, especially me.